Now moving on to the second common grammar issue we're going to cover in this module, identifying and correcting fragments. So what is a fragment? Well, every sentence needs three things. It has to have a subject, a verb, and it also must express a complete thought. So any word group that is missing one of those three things, if it's missing a subject, a verb, or if it doesn't express a complete thought, that's a fragment. There are four types of fragments, four of the most common fragments that we're going to cover in this section. The first that we'll cover in this video is called dependent word fragments. Now, if you've been working through this course in chronological order, if you've gone through each module, then you've heard this phrase before, dependent word fragments, or dependent words, because we've covered it before. So a dependent word fragment, anytime you begin a sentence with a dependent word, you need to be careful that you're not creating a dependent word fragment. A dependent word fragment begins with a dependent word and it can't stand alone. It depends on another statement in order to complete the thought. Now, in the last module that we discussed dependent words, I gave you a list, and here's that list again of the most common dependent words. I also have this available as a handout in this module. So you can refer back to this slide, you can refer to that handout. You may want to familiarize yourself with these most common dependent words as we go through these lessons. So here's an example for you. After I learned the price of a new phone. Well, you can hear right away how that's a dependent fragment, a dependent word fragment. Because if I were to walk up to you on the street and just say, after I learned the price of a new phone, well, you'd be waiting for me to complete that thought. It doesn't complete a thought because after is a dependent word. Now, if we get rid of that dependent word, I learned the price of a new phone, well, that's a complete sentence. That expresses a complete thought. It's that word after that when we add that to the beginning, turns it into a dependent fragment. So how do we correct it? Well, we need to add another statement in order to complete the thought. After I learned the price of a new phone, I decided to keep my old one. Now we have a complete sentence. We have corrected the fragment. Well, let's look at another example. Sometimes we can add a dependent word fragment to the end of an earlier statement in order to complete the thought. For example, my son refused to stop eating meat unless I stopped also. Well, that first part is a complete sentence, right? My son refused to stop eating meat. We have a subject, son. We have a verb, refused. And that does express a complete thought. If I walked up to you and said, my son refused to stop eating meat, well, that's a complete thought. But unless I stopped also is a dependent word fragment because unless is a dependent word. And if I just walked up to you and said, unless I stopped also, that's not enough information. You're depending on more information before you know what I'm talking about. But we can combine these two and correct the fragment. My son refused to stop eating meat unless I stopped also. Now, notice that when we began the sentence with a dependent statement, we set it off with a comma. And when we put the dependent statement at the end, we didn't use a comma. I'm going to flip backwards a couple slides so you can see that. After I learned the price of the new phone, comma, I decided to keep my old one. That dependent phrase comes first. I set it off with a comma. But for the next one, my son refused to stop eating meat unless I stopped also. When the dependent phrase came at the end, I didn't have to use that comma. So keep that in mind as you're making these corrections. Now in the next video, we're going to practice identifying and correcting more dependent word fragments.